On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, half a decade of Belt and Road Initiative, the milestones and the global impact. And U.S. tariffs on another $200 billion worth of Chinese goods on public hearing. What are the chances of working on the differences? Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. This year marks the 5th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. 5 years on, the BRI has doubled down on efforts to build a trade and infrastructure network connecting Asia with Europe and Africa. Earlier today, Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized that China will continue to seek maximum common ground with BRI partners. What's the bottom line for BRI, and what about the future road of the BRI? Let's see what our panelists have to say. But before that, let's take a look at this first.
From concept to reality, covering more than 65 countries, connecting 63% of the world population, contributing about 30% of global GDP. Over 5 years since Chinese President Xi Jinping first came up with the Belt and Road Initiative, its early successes are exciting and encouraging. Since 2013, China has invested more than $60 billion in countries along the Belt and Road. To help boost cooperation, China has established more than 80 overseas economic and trade cooperation zones, providing more than 244,000 local jobs. The China-Europe Express Freight Rail Network, linking 48 domestic cities with 42 European cities, has expanded greatly and boosted trade and investment. Early on Monday, President Xi Jinping said the BRI had met the demand for change in global governance, and the project delivers on a commitment to a community with a shared future, emphasizing the sharing of both rights and responsibilities.
The practice of 5 years has proved that the construction of the Belt and Road is in line with the trend of the times and the direction of historical development. International recognition is growing, more and more partners are involved, and the initiative's influence continues to expand.
More than 2,000 years ago, the ancient Silk Road was a game changer in forging economic and cultural ties between China and other nations. And in modern times, greater diversity in different civilizations. In the 21st century, when the world is facing new challenges, the Belt and Road Initiative is expected to take that spirit of trade and cooperation to new heights, to build a shared future for humanity.
For more on the 5th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, let's turn to our panelists. With us in Beijing, Zhang Jianping from Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation with Ministry of Commerce. In Rio de Janeiro, we have Charles Tang, Chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And in Moscow, Russia, we have Alexander Lukin, Professor and Director of East Asian and SCO Studies at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Congratulations, 5 years effort of BRI. But Mr. Tang, let me begin by asking you, how important is it that China and its partners working on BRI will make sure, as President Xi Jinping today pledged, that it should benefit more to the local people where the projects are going on?
The BRI initiative is a very, very bold and visionary project which will affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people in over 65 countries. And it goes well in the spirit of the Chinese win-win international relations policy, where instead of sending Marines, China sends its business executives and entrepreneurs to trade and do investment. And of course, China will also gain from this initiative, but in the same manner that China changed the continent of Africa from a lost continent into one of hope and development and prosperity, it will do the same for more than 65 countries along and around the route of the BRI initiative. And the extended BRI initiative is already taking shape in many, many of the important ports in Latin America. For example, we're building a major port in the north of Brazil.
I see.
To facilitate the transportation of foodstuff and products between China and Brazil.
Yeah.
On the west coast of Chile, on the Pacific, there's a major port being planned to facilitate all the grains from Argentina going to China.
Well, Mr. Tang, it's wonderful to hear all of these wonderful projects going on, but you haven't answered my question directly, which is how to benefit the people, the local people particularly, where the BRI projects are. That's what Chinese President Xi Jinping today pledged, in fact, but the question is how?
Well, with the development and the connectivity, you know, many of these countries were isolated geographically, and with the massive investments on the BRI project, the economic movement will take shape, economic growth and prosperity will be installed, and of course the people will have benefits with more business, more jobs, and more economic activity.
Well, this is supposed to be win-win. Mr. Zhang, on the other hand, how big a win for China? How big a win for the other partners that are working with China on the BRI projects? That's a question being asked by some.
Generally speaking, actually international trade and international investment within those BRI countries are very important for their development. If you look at the big data in the past 5 years, actually bilateral trade volume within China and those BRI countries already achieved $5.5 trillion. Every year, $1.1 trillion. And the investment in the past 5 years, the Chinese side actually accumulated investment in BRI countries about $80 billion. And then those, BRI projects can provide so lot of job opportunities for those residents in host countries, estimated about 240,000 jobs in those countries. Thus, industrialization and infrastructure improvement promoted those BRI countries' development.
But Mr. Zhang, one of the things we need to really mention in the program that there have been some complaints suggesting that the Chinese workers are working on the Chinese projects sponsored by the Chinese side that are working as the BRI joint initiative in some of those countries. Some have this complaint. Of course, we are not saying it's representing the whole picture. But the question, once again, is how to let the local people benefit, while at the same time, this is going to be a win-win both for China and where the countries are, the BRI projects.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned, I think that this type of saying and understanding just a part of picture inside of, full picture. Let me give you an example. That is when Chinese side, actually constructed a railway in East Africa countries. In that progress, actually, we provided so lot of job opportunities for those local workers. In China-Pakistan economic corridors, when we construct railway and road, from Chinese side, we provide training courses for those local workers, local engineers. Also, we dispatched those local workers and managers to China, accepted training courses, and then a lot of local people actually get their working skills in that process.
I see. Well, these are examples, certainly, Mr. Zhang. You say it's very much on the positive side. Having said that, though, Mr. Lukin, whether it is training projects, it is the funding for the infrastructure projects, it is a lot of money. So the question is whether there's going to be sustainable provision of funding for these projects that are happening around the world if you look at the vision of the BRI for the future. Professor Lukin, as an ex-scholar working on China-related subject from Russia, how do you see that question?
Well, it's not an easy question, because as far as I know, Chinese own railways don't bring any commercial benefit to China. They are all subsidized by the government. So of course when you do it abroad, there's a question who is going to pay for it. Now, for example, Russia and China are in talks about building a high-speed railway from Moscow to Vladivostok, or it's probably going to be the longest, one of the longest in the world. But even its preliminary stage from Moscow to Kazan, about 1,000 kilometers, there are long discussions about who pays for what, and is it going to be profitable. So the main thing that if such big projects can be profitable, because we know that China, of course, is a generous country, but it also wants to benefit from various projects. And because of China's internal problem, it's not at the position now to pay for everyone.
Well,
but generally, by the way, I would say that I would look at this project. Actually, there are two projects, Belt and Road projects, and we are in Russia are mostly interested, of course, in the Silk Road one, because it has to do more with the continent, with the Eurasian continent. I would look at that from the point of view of geopolitics, not that much economics, because it's interesting that China is promoting new ideas and shows probably an alternative way of development to the entire world. Now it's not only, there is not only Western model, but also Chinese model of development, and not only on China, but also of some neighboring countries. And of course, it's of course going to benefit many people in neighboring countries, but also not everybody in the world are happy that there is another strong economic model. So there's also some criticism of the project in the world, of those two projects in the world.
Professor
of course, sponsored by the United States and those countries.
Professor Lukin, you brought up several interesting points. Let's handle them one by one. Mr. Zhang, I need to have some direct answer from you about that, because what Professor Lukin said is very true, that this is going to be a win-win situation when China officially initiated or proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, and therefore having all the partners to join from all over the world. China will be one of those winners. China is not going to be the losers of it, and therefore the projects that are being done has to be sustainable, it has to be financially viable, and it's going to be also important infrastructure projects. It's going to create more economic prosperity in the home countries where those projects are. So, Mr. Zhang, that is quite a challenging question. Everybody needs to be a winner.
In my view, actually, BRI is a new type of trans-intercontinental economic cooperation platform on which actually international cooperation and development, that will be the main topic. And then, today we are at the age of globalization and regional economic cooperation, even if integration. So in that process, actually, global value chain can play a very important role. So today, if you look at cooperation on BRI, that's not, I don't think that's a zero game. Actually, today we can benefit each other. We can promote our complementary, economic relationship. And then, for some of detailed, things. For example, just before, the Russian friends mentioned, the railway between China and Europe. And some of them today can get benefit, but some of them still need to get governmental subsidies. But I think that's in short term. But in the long run, if we can explore a more detailed business model, and we can link more countries along the routes, gradually we can get benefits. On the other hand, I like to say that yes, he's right. That is actually BRI. Not only China's model as well as the Western model. Actually, we can combine, both, Western model and the Chinese model. We can promote, bilateral cooperation plus, multilateral cooperation, and then we can have, new, development model for global governance and regional governance.
There are a lot of possibilities that could arise from the BRI platform, as you said, sir. Mr. Tang, therefore, I want to have your comments on this as well. There seems to be a tendency of impatience and a tendency of skepticism before thinking about the solutions once we have new ideas in the world. For example, this one initiated originally from China and some of its partners, Belt and Road Initiative. People could just talk very sarcastically about the idea without providing any other alternatives of future growth of the world. And therefore, Mr. Tang, when we have an idea like this, when we have an idea being tested at its very initial stage, what is the right way to look at the pros and the cons, and the right way to come up with the best solutions to the current challenges? Mr. Tang.
Well, I think that it's a visionary and bold initiative that will create prosperity and development. China's win-win policy has created prosperity and development in many parts of the world. I use the African example. When China started investing massively into the infrastructure of Africa, which transformed the continent from a lost continent to a continent of hope, there was also a lot of criticism and skepticism. So, and if we measure in terms of economic gains, the railways and the initiative will pay for itself many, many times over. Not only the road, land BRI, but also the maritime BRI. The economic movement, the economic gains, the development and the prosperity that this massive project will encourage will be extremely compensating in terms of economic investments. The return on investment will be manifold. Of course, we're not talking within the next year, but in the medium term, the economic activity and prosperity will more than pay for the initial investment.
Right. But also the important question is, Professor Lukin, whether the private sector and different kinds of players will be interested in the project, that they will join in so that it will become a project for everyone. We heard, Professor Lukin, for example, Citibank, it is having its own branch working from Beijing on the issue of Belt and Road Initiative. That, of course, is an international investment bank. On the other hand, would there be more players just like that from the private sector joining in? How important is it that these forces will be geared up and they will become an instrumental part of it, just besides the government input? Professor Lukin.
Well, I agree with that. Russia needs infrastructure. I remember when I first went to China, this was early 1980s, China lacked roads and, the railways were very bad. And I actually thought that the Soviet Union at that time was a more developed country. But now I just envy China, because I go by Chinese fast trains, I see these Chinese highways, and I really envy your country. And I think that if we have something, if we can build something like that with China's money or with China's help, or with cooperation with China in Russia, it would be very good for Russia. The problem is that we need to find some, means of financing and some mechanism of some mechanism for that. And I hope we are doing this. By the way, Russia is developing cooperation with Silk Road Economic Belt project within the framework of agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and Silk Belt. This was an agreement signed in 2015 between, first it was a declaration between Russia and China, and then the Eurasian Economic Union. It's an economic organization with 5 members, 4 more than Russia and 4 other former Soviet republics, and we are developing this cooperation together, all 6 countries. So this is very important not only to Russia but to other members of Eurasian Economic Union. Last year a specific agreement was signed with China on specific projects and terms of cooperation. Actually it was this year, not last year.
It seems that there are new models that are coming out as to the kinds of cooperation that countries, different sectors, and also players could have on the general platform of BRI. Before we go, Mr. Zhang, I want to have your comments about that one question important as well. That this is China, very new learner, in fact, about international governance, trying to work out a kinds of platform with the rest of the world about development, connectivity. BRI is certainly one of those. The earlier 5 years, what has it taught China and the rest of the world about what China wants? Mr. Zhang, briefly.
Yeah, actually China's initiative just is China's recommendation and suggestion. Actually, we hope to provide a new cooperation platform on which more and more countries can create new global supply chain and production network, and all of countries can work together in order to promote development and cooperation. And then, of course, we hope that we can achieve sustainable development targets in 2030. So in this regard, I think that BRI is a new platform for global development.
All right. Zhang Jianping, Charles Tang, Alexander Lukin, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And you are watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program.